obviously a hero of Ukraine, one of the most distinguished generals that Ukraine has produced in its time. Perhaps one of the most distinguished military leaders Ukraine has had in centuries, and he's with us. In some ways, I don't like to talk about people as living icons, but General Zabrodskyi is a living icon. And so with that, I'm going to give this important session over to someone I deeply respect, Phil Karber. Phil, it's all yours, and please, you and the General, please explain to us what's going on. Okay, thanks.
As some of you may know, I just returned actually recently from my 31st trip to Ukraine. 31st trip to Ukraine since the conflict started. People often ask me, you spent 180 days in the combat zone, why did you do it? And when I thought about it, my response is, other than the birth of my children, my 6 kids and my 9 grandkids, one of the most memorable elements of my life has been the unique opportunity to witness a country become a nation, to witness an army that had been ignored and treated poorly rise to the occasion and defend their sovereignty. And the ability to watch that progress month by month, week by week, through the conflict in the spring of 14, the summer, the Russian invasion in late August, and the horrific winter offensive of January, February, March of 15. It was truly a unique experience and a very moving one. When General Clark and I arrived in Ukraine at the invite of the government in March of 14, Clark said, Karber, I'm going to go see the President of France, General Breedlove, President Obama, which he did. He said, we need to find out what's going on in the front because the U.S. was not allowing our attachés or intelligence people to go east of the Dnieper. One of the first people I met the last week of March of 14, light infantry parachute or air mobile battalion holding the Crimean causeway against a very large Russian invasion force just across the causeway was then Colonel Zabrodskyi. And since then, we've gotten to know each other fairly well. I've seen a number of his exploits personally. But he's sort of one of many of the examples that I cite and feel in my heart as the progress of national willingness to defend sovereignty and the rebuilding of the Ukrainian military. Often criticized, often maligned, but making, in my view, substantial progress, and in part, to a large part, due to the officers like General Zabrodskyi. When I first met him on the Crimean Peninsula, I was sitting there looking at the artillery glasses across the, and I see very heavy Russian formations, and I turned to him, and he had just dug in one line of trenches, a few mortars. I turned to him and I said, how long can you hold this position? And he smiled, with a grin of his, and he goes, to the last man. The New York Times, a couple weeks later, read the first article on Ukraine from Clark's and my efforts, and they included a photograph of me talking to a young woman, young female soldier. And at that time, the Russian snipers were taking aim at Ukrainian officers. And so I'm talking to her, and I noticed she had body armor, which was extremely scarce, and usually only the officers were. And I said, oh, I noticed you have body armor. She said, turned to me, she said, yes, my commander gave me his. Later, in that early July July, when Ukraine started its Plan B offensive, I was able to witness the efforts of the Air Mobile Unit, which made a daring, and I mean daring and dangerous, night operation to seize a key hill outside of Sloviansk, which outflanked the defenders, and basically led to the rapid and relatively low casualties and low collateral damage defeat of the separatists at the Battle of Sloviansk and Kramatorsk. Later that month, there were Ukrainian units along the border. A number of people have talked about how important it is for Ukraine to seal the border, but the problem is when you have separatists on one side and Russian artillery firing on the other, it ended up being a death trap. And there were several Ukrainian brigades that were literally caught. They couldn't get resupplied, they couldn't get their injured out. So on a very emergency basis, Colonel Zabrodskyi put together the now famous raid. And those of you who haven't seen the documentary, I highly recommend it, called The Raid. It's since become in military literature known as Zabrodskyi's Raid. 470-kilometer drive over 20 days. 170 kilometers of it behind the enemy lines. Towards the end of August, it looked like Ukraine was a few weeks from finishing off the separatists, and the Russians then intervened. A major attack at Luhansk, overran the airfield there, and in the south blew the entire front wide open, overrunning Ukrainian 51st Brigade, ending in the Battle of Ilyich, which was, we all know, was a disaster. It's interesting, just a few weeks ago, people were celebrating or honoring or recognizing the Ilyich defeat. What doesn't tend to get mentioned in those is Zabrodskyi's unit was the 95th Brigade was the only unit in reserve available to come down and try to cover the entire front that's blown open between Donetsk and Mariupol. In fact, Mariupol was effectively surrounded. He and his unit are moving down within 24 hours, but Ilyich had fallen by then. And I asked him, I said, why didn't you just try to put a defense in? He said, well, it's over 100 kilometers. I had one light brigade. I couldn't cover it. And he then used the same phrase that the Israeli general had told General Stary and I sitting on the battlefield in Israel when an Israeli brigade, armored brigade commander had outflanked and knocked out two Syrian divisions in the 73 war. And he said, I didn't have enough force to defend. I had to attack. I had to knock them off their game plan. And that's what Zabrodskyi and his team did. Again, an enormously daring and high-risk operation. In 2000, he was then promoted to general and hero of Ukraine, twice hero of Ukraine. And in 2017 was the commander in the ATO. It was interesting. The Russians have actually written about Zabrodskyi. And they'll drop a line, oh yes, he's another one of these bad guys. But it's amazing how one's opponents see one. So the title of a Russian article was "The Perfect Soldier." The perfect soldier. And in it, they point out that walk through honestly his many exploits. And they wrote that article at the time he took over the ATO. And it was interesting, I went back and looked at the statistics, and all of a sudden the level of violence seemed to drop. Now, maybe it was just accident, but it was interesting. People talk about the importance of reform of Ukrainian society, defense industry. In the military, I think much of it is a matter of restructuring, a sense of vision, and a sense of what needs to be done, and then the will to get it done. But when the war started, the Ukrainian airborne forces, they had 3 brigades, 3 regiments. They were all very light infantry, following, by the way, the NATO model that was mentioned this morning. Go light. They had only 6 artillery battalions, no armor, no tanks at least. General Zabrodskyi, as commander of the airborne and air assault forces, converted that force, which was already viewed as Ukraine's most elite troops, into 7 full-up brigades. When I say full-up brigades, I mean fully manned and fully supported with all the elements. Today they have, they went from 6 artillery battalions, this is just the airborne force, to 22. Give you a measure of that. If you take all the artillery battalions in the Baltic, Germany, and Britain, and the active forces of those areas, they don't equal what the amount of increase in firepower in the Ukrainian airborne and air assault forces. We've added 18 armored companies, including 6 tank units. I stress that because it isn't just a matter of happy talk. It involves the need to deeply assess what is needed, and then fight organizational and resources to get those things. And that's a different level of leadership. It's not just management involves true leadership. It's demanding in some ways as a battlefield. I've often described General Zabrodskyi. He came here to the United States, I think 3 times, and lectured at Fort Benning, Fort Bragg, Fort Bliss, to 1,000 U.S. Army, the best U.S. Army officers. They were called the Warfighter Conference, and received literally a standing ovation and the highest praise from 4-star generals, and then General McMaster, recently National Security Advisor to the President, personally said that it was Zabrodskyi's lectures and insights that led the Army to do what was called the New Generation Warfare Study, that is now leading to the reformation of our own Army and moving away from being so light and getting back and getting ready to take on peer competitors. So his influence has not only been in Ukraine, but in this summer he decided that the Ukrainian political system needed that kind of leadership, and took a leave of absence from the Army, and ran and was elected in the number 4 slot of the European Solidarity Party, and is now on the Ukrainian Defense Committee. I've compared him to General Don Starry, the father of American airland battle, who was one of these very unique people who was a charismatic battlefield commander, but also had the ability to kind of have an out-of-body look and see and the vision of how to restructure forces. So I've heard other military people refer to Zabrodskyi as a Ukrainian Rommel or Ukrainian Patton or Sharon, but he also has his ability to take the top-down view and look at the operational implications. When Walter asked him to speak here, I challenged him and said, well, okay, you've done at the operational level, how about going one step further and giving your thoughts on the strategic view? So, General Zabrodskyi.
Thank you, Dr. Karber. Thank you for your such a powerful introduction. I start to think this is my birthday or something. Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I want to say a great thank you and appreciate that you continue to pay attention to political events around the Ukraine. And not because of Trump's slight perspective of impeachment, but just because it touched the heart, and you can stay aside from all events around our country during the last 5 or 6 years. My next
point, I want to stress it on the name of my presentation. Actually, it is not a view from Ukrainian Parliament, because Ukrainian Parliament, at least majority of Ukrainian Parliament, has some special points of view for everything. So actually, this is a point of view like from General Zabrodskyi, nothing else. Before I start, I want to suggest you to take a look at the situation in our country a little bit more generally, not just in order to predict what will the next step or next informational input from our president or from our parliament. Just take a look at the situation just in the country, which has a military conflict on his territory and some part of annexed territory during the last 6 years. When I try to find the answer, what we need, I need to create two things. First of all, is a list of challenges and some set of supplementary questions in order to make answer for main question. About challenges. First of all, before we start, try to find answer. We should make an assessment based on some realistic scenario. What potential it could be and what is the probability of which variant will realize it in the nearest future. Actually, the choice between what to do, it is a choice between what scenario you adopt as a more workable and not small. Next point, we need to recognize the impossible to fight alone with the Russian Federation. You see the force Russia 1 to 5.7, but if we put on this Russia additional nuclear weapon, 4 fleets, air superiority, and this Russia, I believe, will different estimates up to 1 to 20 or 1 to 30. Next point of challenge, the current technological superiority of our opposite forces. As it is, no questions. Nobody will argue with it. About supplementary questions. First of all, we need to find out what do we need to do. Maybe we want to destroy Russian armed forces completely. Maybe we want to capture the Moscow. I don't know. Maybe we want to annexation some region from Russia. The answer is we need to have a clear vision of national security and strategic intent and prepare to long-term multi-decade strategic competition. This is my variant of answer. Next supplementary answer, what can, how? First of all, maybe some additional forces, maybe some additional support. But in realistic war, what can help us is the partners, with opponent of our opponent, or leverage a strategic position and help strategic partner. And the second supplementary question is how can we complete? First of all, we need to explore the upward vulnerability. And second, we need to reduce our vulnerability with the technological partnership. If we go further, we need to take a look a little bit back, not in chronology or events during this 6 years, but we need to once again remind each other what is the points of, what's the background of current situation. First of all, nobody will argue about systemic long-term intervention of Russia in ideological and informational sphere. Neglect of national security during the last 25 years of our independence as well. Annexation by forces Crimea Peninsula and direct military aggression in Donbass. This is a fact. Overestimated our previous international agreement effectiveness. I'm talking about Budapest Agreement, which Russia signed as well. Overestimation of Western Alliance unity and willingness to help. We put a lot of communication and cooperation with the NATO like a capstone of our exterior policy and the capstone of development of all our forces. But if you take a look on the events of the spring 2014, you remember very well, NATO did not too much, except maybe support. And further mobilize Ukraine defense industrial base for our own long-term competition. We hear today in this auditorium about the successful activities of Ukropromprom, but believe me, it's only the beginning of long, long way. Felicitation in 5 topics. The 101 progress. You know everybody about these results, but by the way, this is the number of casualties and EDPs, I believe, very, very lower. State level long-term competition security defense plan does not exist. This is the greatest military secret of Ukraine. During 5 years, even 6 years already, we can't find out the answer to do, how we need to do, and all these questions we already asked. State level, external military intervention fighting for Ukraine is unlikely. In spite of Budapest Memorandum, in spite of too much worrying about the situation in Ukraine, you know well, very well, unfortunately. Only one army in the world will guarantee fight for Ukraine. This is Ukrainian armed forces. All other is just the promises and nothing more. Military technological imbalance doesn't guarantee effective resistance in case of further military intervention. I'm talking first of all about high military technologies. With them we have a huge gap between Russian Federation as our not potential but real opposite forces and our armed forces. If we present a conception, we need to talk about different options. What was and what is our first option? So-called options A. So-called bleeding conflict. In 2 words, we maintain the status quo and maintain the broad approach to security issue. Actually, it is just leave as it is. In this case, we get some benefits and some disadvantages. About disadvantages, about the benefits. We still in comfort zone and we're still a victim of the international society. We preserve resources and time just in order to provide some additional time to make finally a decision what we need to do. And we keep a space for exterior and interior political maneuvers in accordance with the situation which can change each day. What about disadvantages? We continue to get political pressure. The real threat of military intervention will continue. Direct and indirect casualties and conflict continue. And such numbers, 2 slides ago, continue to grow. And we open the source of political instability inside the Ukraine. Because approximately half, if not the 2/3 of all interior problems is from internal pressure. And the end state, if we choose the options A, our maneuver in Europe-Russia trade attenuation, countering escalated sources by instability in the region, and the United States loses interest in to support it losing, because this is the shortest way to lose. And complication of Ukraine and concentrate our own interior problems, because it's still under the influence of the Donbas conflict and the annexation of the Crimean Peninsula. Options B, so-called horrible surrender. We recognize the Crimean annexation, we recognize and provide a special status for Donbas. In this case, advantages. Fast and shortest way to peace in our time. By the way, it meets all before election promises of our current government and our president. Open the door for Russian investment in national economy. And pursue the Crimea, pursue the China as a technological investor and partner. What about our losses in this case? Full-scale integration of LNR and political activity in Ukraine. By the way, this is the final result of realization of Steinmeier formula. Direct influence on political decisions and through national democratic institutions. Since the election on the occupied territory will successful, start from that time, all people in occupied territory should be the legal represented in Ukrainian power. Decline the military option to independent problem solvers, so no more war, the road for peace. But in this case, we reach very fast the next end state, federalization of Ukraine. This is the first point of the Putin's plan, how to catch the Ukraine. Not to catch physically, not to catch a territory. He don't want to destroy our economy or something like that. He needs the buffer states. He needs a vassal. He needs some kind of gray zone. You know this word well from Donbas. Gray zone between Europe and Russia. And finally, our option C, strategic transactional partnership. This is our suggestion how we can answer on our 3 questions at the beginning of the presentation. The purpose of option C is successful repel aggression of Russia in all dimensions of hybrid war, not not just in military. First of all, informational, economy, and political. We have 3 key tasks in order to realize option C. First of all, we need to create a defense strategy for all 4 dimensions. We need to gain a relevant and powerful partner. And it will be great beneficial if it will partner for both scale player. We need to adopt the modern defense technologies. Because in spite of, we talk today about willing to fight, about spirit, but you know, no spirit in this world which can replace the tomahawk. And in this case, we reach the next end state. Opposite forces consider military intervention as unacceptable. The so-called unacceptable losses, we already talked about it today. Any other hybrid components in conflict are neutralized, and they reduce on the minimum the Russian influence and situation inside Ukraine. And by this way, Ukraine stays a stable state with a course of democratic violence. This is the idea. Strategy, how to reach it. Before we start to talk about strategies, we need to stress it on a couple of capstones. First of all, opposite forces is not just armed forces of Russian Federation. We fight with the state. And we have a business with a huge state machine, including the informational sphere, including economic, including even influence, because it has become so important, especially during the last 5 years, on the international area. We need to realize in a hostile environment, political military goal of Russia. We already talked about it. They don't want to destroy Ukraine. They want Ukraine with pro-Russian forces. Unity of efforts on fundamentals, political, military, economic, international. Found way how to resist. I don't want to talk now about which direction we should move, which rocket or bombing strike we need to provide, which kind of ships we need, or which kind of aircraft we need. We need to find out for ourselves way to resist. If we choose the military way, resist by force. If we choose a combination between military way, for instance, and the political and economy, and something like that. Course of action, this is a topic for detailed planning. This is for our general staff and for our Minister of Defense. We need to clearly understand the end state of conflict. We already talked about it. This unacceptable losses for armed forces of Russian Federation. We need to adopt and put it as a base, asymmetrical approach to the planning because of Russian, because of number of troops, because of technological superiority. Our answer could be only asymmetrical and nothing else. And we need to adopt the contingency planning because everything is dynamic and opposite forces strategy in dynamics as well. Next point and next answer. We need an alliance. What does it mean to be alliance? Well, we have a lot of historical examples. Father Churchill said, no alliance for all times, just interest for all times, something like that. To be a friend, it means not just an ideological support and not just an informational support, and not without, oh, I'm worried about Ukraine. You know, it's all dimensions, even material support, even support by force, even support by providing information, for instance, reconnaissance information, which the United States already did for Ukraine and continue to do it. About candidates to alliance, no action talk only. How do you think, what is it? See on the capital letter. This is the answer. Great. Symbolic and non-strategic gifts is what to do NATO 5 years before. I don't want to abuse our NATO partners, but actually and essentially, if you take a look on last 5 years, too much conversation, too much demands, too much conditions, but not too much support. And finally, any alliance is supposed to be transactional. What do we have to trade? The base of alliance could be different. We know a lot of historical examples. The classical historical example about alliance is between United States during whole history since your independence war. NATO perspective, pluses and minuses. Unfortunately, right now we see more minuses than pluses. The answer is on quotation. The dependence of majority of European countries, first of all Germany and France, from Russian energy resources. And so far they will maintain this dependence. And so far the NATO will maneuver around but do nothing. Me personally, I know only one country in the world which can provide the real, reliable support, including material, not just informational or political, which is independent from this instrument put in Europe. I'm talking about the United States. As the variant which can adopt it and at least discuss in the political sphere in the United States and Ukraine as well, for me personally, from my point of view, is to provide for Ukraine status of major non-NATO ally. You know this mechanism? It started to work, I believe, from the late 90s, and it still works. Pretty effective. No too much mutual obligation, but a lot of mutual support. And finally, technologies. We hear today about rocket Neptune and other pieces of our own equipment. But I just want to stress by this slide for 5 topics which we have, for 5 gaps which we have between our and our enemy. First of all, it's a warfare in air, air defense and air force. Command control system and electronic warfare, we already talked about it today. Naval warfare. Maintain the presence in Black Sea. It's a question about balance in Black Sea region. At least it looks us now. And finally, we need to create and maintain in-depth capability, which we don't have now. I'm talking about short-range theater missiles. We already started about it, but anyway, we will need international support and maybe direct support from the United States as well. For better understanding why this 5 technological gaps so important and why the creation of defense strategy is so important. This is, on this slide you can see, this is just a general map of Europe and the territory of Ukraine. First of all, the whole territory of Ukraine under Russian surface-to-surface, even middle-range rocket system, missile system. Provide major improvement in NATO early warning and defense depth coverage. It's our input, how you say, what we can put on the table when we start to talk, for instance, for major non-NATO alliance status. We contain the Russian Turkish Black Sea aerial denial and naval superiority with the air-to-water and land-based anti-ship missiles. This is our next input on the table. Additional, except geographical location, we can provide airfields, we can provide a territory for the base, fortunately nothing more, at least now, maybe in perspective. But anyway, the international military presence, direct military presence on territory of Ukraine, will much better improve the abilities of our own armed forces, much better than all training courses, all our conference, and all other additional bulk of supply from other countries. Finally, recommendation. What we need first? Detailed and encompassing plan for defense of Ukraine. This is a task for our defense institutions to create such a plan. Direct international support from partners that counts, reliable partners. Get modern technology. We need to bring the bond and bus in 21st century, because right now, it's just in best case, is at the end of 20th century. As a result, in future, no way how to suppress Ukraine by military power or political extortion. And this is a condition to start the process inside Ukraine, to be more democratic, to fight with corruption, and solve the all entire problem which we have already now. Way ahead, eliminating external pressure factor is a bridge of economic growth. Main task, planning with special attention to asymmetric approach, search for reliable partners, and bridging the technological gap. But we need to stress on couple more things. First of all, time is running out, and each additional day of conflict is additional victims, from both sides, by the way. We need to remember the hesitation of Ukraine is a lost image in international authority. We already have too long term to hesitate. And finally, humility, as history teaches us, stimulate the aggression appetite. I'm done, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for your attention.
So, questions? Yes, please. All right.
Thank you so much. Go ahead. I was wondering if Mr. Zabrodskyi, I'm sorry, I couldn't see that far. Mr. Zabrodskyi could talk about the areas in which Ukraine-NATO interoperability today is most challenged. Not just in terms of technologies perhaps, but more broadly. For instance, the intelligence services. Are there risks that Ukrainian intelligence services are still rather penetrated by the Russian forces, the same with Ukrainian armed services? If you could comment.
First of all, yes. Yes, for sure. If we talk about the directions or dimensions of our cooperation with NATO right now, first of all, of course, it's not a direct military support. First of all, it's training of forces. Right now, we have two training missions on the constant base in Ukraine. They replace the set of instructors, but this mission continues to train our forces already during the last 4 years. Next direction for cooperation, of course, this is exchange of intelligent information. Because Ukraine, again, about technologies. Right now, Ukraine doesn't have such technologies like satellite communication, full-scale satellite reconnaissance, or, for instance, high altitude unmanned aerial vehicles reconnaissance, and of course, not a special reconnaissance assets like, for instance, Germany. But what I would like to say, that too much activities in that directions, they're in progress on the cover of NATO. But on each more or less serious situation, we cooperate directly with the armed forces of the United States. Nothing more. In order to provide you quick insight, what does it mean in practice or in the ground, actually in the water, because my example will about Black Sea. I told yesterday the Phillip one small piece of almost close information. In our naval base in Odessa, we have a presence of military ships, NATO ships, again, NATO. In accordance with international agreement, international ships, not from the country, from Black Sea region, can operate in Black Sea in peacetime 14 days, not more. And the NATO had a schedule, for instance, 2 French frigates, after that 2 German frigates, and each 14 days they change the ships. And of course, the United States Navy is part of this program. Approximately 1/2 of ships from United States Navy, from your Mediterranean fleet. And when the, for instance, German ship or French ship or regular ship comes to Odessa and operates around the Odessa, and the Black Sea Fleet of Russian Federation, they declare the so-called yellow alarm. It means improve the readiness, combat readiness, but usually slight. As soon as United States Navy comes to Odessa, they immediately improve the alarms up to the red level. This is from open sources, and the Colonel will confirm this information. And as soon as United States Navy ships leave the Odessa, they again reduce the combat readiness. It's just insight and illustrate how they consider the ability to fight, willing to fight, or even technological readiness to fight
And for me, it's a good illustration. NATO in this situation can be just a title, just like a sign. But in any serious action, we have a business only with the United States, and hopefully it will continue.
If I could add to that, on the training side, I've interviewed our guys there, particularly the training area, and to a man, they keep coming back and saying, we're learning more from the Ukrainians at a higher level of operational art than we're teaching. So it's been very much of a two-way. Would you please introduce yourself to? Yes, Fred?
Bill, I'm going to give it only about 2-3 more minutes.
Good afternoon, I'm Mykhailo Voix, Voice of America, originally from Kyiv, Ukraine journalist. Well, I must confess that it was one of the most interesting panel over the last many months here in Washington, D.C., because you bring your insights from the ground, which is very interesting. General Zabrodskyi, I want to ask you some, two small questions, but they are, it's maybe require one broad answer. So, now you're a politician. So first of all, I mean, we can predict your, we can guess your assessments, your view on the Steinmeier formula. But do you believe, because of the common wisdom here on the West, especially in Washington D.C., that there is no military solution in the eastern Ukraine? I've been quite a while in the eastern Ukraine, in the Donbass, and from what I've heard from some troops, they say that we can strike, we can liberate these territories, and we can just kick out all these Russians, the separatists, because they're not motivated, they don't want to die for their land, and so forth. And they're very humiliated by their regime, because they have to leave their old rankings and so forth, pretending they're not there. So, two questions. So, political assessments of the Steinmeier formula, and if it's possible from your military perspectives, is it possible to liberate Ukrainian land from Russian and proxy separatists militarily? Thank you very much.
I waited for this question, and I was afraid about this question because we have a rule of conversation, yes, a rule of discussion, and Dr. Karber instructed me no politics at all. That's okay. So let's do it. Very short about Steinmeier formula. I absolutely agree with the previous people who told about Steinmeier formula. Very short. The Steinmeier formula is a short formula of Ukrainians' capitulation, for your understanding. Nothing else. And majority of people in Ukraine understand it. The question is, from this majority, approximately one half just neglected. So they disagree. And other one understand, or try to understand, this is no other way to peace. Because the propaganda running, because the information influence continue. Okay, let's stop the war, let's stop the war. And nobody want to think about price. What was the price to stop the war? It's about just a couple of words about Steinmeier formula. Me personally, I'm absolutely disagree. Because Steinmeier is one half of Minsk II. And by the way, the half which Ukraine needs to do, but not the opposite side. And about, I'm not sure that I'm united to answer for two questions. Can you remember the second one?
What are the military prospects of...
The military prospects, okay. As a United States Army Command and General Staff College teach me in some time, there's no way how to solve a problem, even military problem, only by military forces. Any situation, including our conflict on the east of Ukraine, should be the united efforts in a military sphere, military dimension, in economic dimensions, in political dimensions, in informational dimensions. The question is, what needs to be the portion between these four dimensions? But this is a question about our presentation. This is a question about detailed planning, nothing more. I agree, no just a military way. Because when we say, for instance, Iraq war, Desert Storm, it was just a military way. It was not just a military way. It was a full dimension operation in all four capstone spheres. Thank you.
Still have to do logs.
The question is this. I have heard from people who have been talking to people in government that one option for Krim has been floated around, and I want to know whether you've heard of this. The idea of a settlement around giving Crimea to the Russians under lease, like Hong Kong, but making it non-military, thereby respecting Ukrainian sovereignty. However, understanding the status quo of Russian occupancy and effectively legitimizing it, but in a rather legal way and looking for a long-term end game. Now, this is something that just came, that I heard by the by, and I'm just wondering whether that's something that is actually seriously being discussed.
Yes, during these last 4 years, I believe at least 3 times this question was a question for serious discussion. But all 3 times, the position of Ukrainian leadership, previous or current leadership, the same. We are not going to trade our land. And by the way, I know only one example when the deal about land was successful. It's when the Russian Empire sold to you Alaska.
And now they want it back.
And how did that work out for the Russians?
If I can add to that, I think
Very good, Jim.
as relayed, if your statement was accurate, it's crazy. I mean, the whole reason the Russians wanted Crimea is because of the naval base and the air bases and the strategic position. If they agreed to pull that out, I mean, they don't care about it, controlling the Tartars and having the Riviera for their retirees. So I mean, the whole it makes no sense in terms of if the deal is pull our military. I can't imagine.
Pull the military out, but we can non-nuclear, with a non-nuclear pledge.
That's a whole other issue.
You know, if you go turn back to Crimea problem, from point of view even from the naval warfare, the problem was it's why the Sevastopol naval base still on the territory of Ukraine during all years of our independence. Because the majority of ships, I even don't want to talk about submarine, they have some set in Black Sea, they came based on other ports. It's only one port and only one naval base with all set of equipment and the properly depth condition in Black Sea. This is Sevastopol. Because I know the history of this town. This town was built as a naval base and still the naval base, and I believe this will be an important naval base, strategic important naval base next 100 years. It's, so I'm absolutely agree with Phillip. The question about Crimea, it's not a question about territory. It's a question about take the territory in order to provide, in order to set condition for successful operation of Black Sea fleet, nothing more. Everything other is just like bonuses.
And a trade on denuclearizing it is ridiculous because we brought back the weaponry, both aircraft and naval are all dual capable. The warheads can be brought back in an hour. So I mean, it's absolutely silly to trade anything for a promissory note. Leaving aside how it will be inspected. If you like Budapest, then you'll love that. Well, I think
Yeah, we've got to get going, but this was really absolutely, I knew that was going to be good, so, yes, thank you.